Hey guys, what's up? I'm Jessie, and normally this is the part where I tell you I'm excited to talk with you about X rifle, but unfortunately I'm kind of disappointed in this one. You guys know I love milsurps, you know I love bolt actions, so when you talk about a modern implementation of those old school concepts, you would expect it to kind of supersede the performance and really give something that is phenomenal. And unfortunately, this one didn't quite hit the mark for me. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and without further ado, let's get started on what I think might be the worst straight pull rifle. So, the terrible rifle in question today is going to be the Hyperpet K9 Cannon. Now you can see here that this is actually kind of a blunderbuss. The muzzle is flared to make easier loading, and it does obviously have a straight pull action here. Now, right off the bat, since I am gonna kind of rag on this a bit, I will start off with giving it some love. It is obviously very lightweight, very compact, easy to control. Unloaded, it does weigh in at about only 1.65 pounds, which is fantastic. Normally at that kind of weight, you would expect recoil to be unbearable, to say the least. But the ammo for this does actually work really well with this design, and they kind of play in together to make a very smooth shot. You can see here that it does hold 2 additional rounds of ammo on top of the one that you load into the muzzle. But the ammo for this does really weigh nothing. Even if you are carrying this to its full mag capacity, you are still under 3 pounds, which is unheard of. If this is a caliber you guys are familiar with, then you know that this ammo is susceptible to moisture. The caliber was not designed with waterproofness in mind at all. Normally we expect that to really degrade the performance of the ammunition, but in this instance it does both not add weight to the system, which is great, and still allows it to perform to expected specifications. I will say that the ammo does slightly swell when it gets introduced to moisture in the environment, but even with that, the rounds do still fit in the additional holders on the side. And to give this some extra love in that regard, I will say it is common to see rifles in this category have their own specific ammo type, so you wind up being stuck with that manufacturer's ammunition production. You might have preferences on what ammo you use. This one right here does use standard caliber is great. Okay, this does use standard caliber dimensions, meaning that you can really interchange this with whatever ammunition manufacturer you prefer. So the overall length for this is just shy of 23 inches. And now the interesting thing about this design is that basically none of that is the barrel. If you guys can see here that even when cocked and ready to go, you can see here that the barrel length is sub 3 inches, which is really unique. Normally you want to see longer barrels to get some actual long range performance, but this design does not depend on barrel length in order to allow the ammunition to reach full velocity. Right off the bat, a first downside we can see without even trying this system here is that there's no spot for attachments. Granted, there is ample room up here to put on a pick rail if you want, although the system would probably have to be welded considering there's no designated attachment points. But if you were looking to throw an optic or a light on this, you're gonna kind of have to do it a roundabout way. And in addition to that, I do think that the irons that come on this sight are lacking. You can see over here that your front sight post is kind of this little notch. And you can find the centerline seam, but realistically there's nothing that's actually guiding your eye. So when you shoulder this and when you try to fire, you don't know what you're looking at. And honestly, I don't know if it matters much anyway, because this doesn't exactly have a lot of accuracy. Even if they had put in a more user-friendly sight post, I don't think anyone's actually using it. I will give this rifle some love. It does have the benefit of being almost entirely ambidextrous, which in today's market, we love to see that, right? I say almost because while you can comfortably shoot this with either hand, the ammunition additional holders here are tapered. So the one side is larger than the other. So it requires you to enter the ammo from the left side of the weapon. You can't unload it from the right side. You can push it through this end, but the ammunition won't extend past this hole here. So if you are left-handed, you might have to treat this more like some fancy AK reload, which isn't the end of the world. It's not super hard to do, you can work around it, but if that's an area of concern, something to at least be aware of. Aside from the lack of rail space for any attachments, I do find that the trigger on this to be a little mushy. You guys can see here that there's a lot of wiggle room just off the start, but obviously that's not going to mean much if it's not actually chambered. This is unloaded, of course, but you can see even at full extent, there's kind of this non-existent wall. You can see I can push all the way in and then it finally goes. I will say the current iteration in my hand right now is modified from its factory settings, so the trigger pull was a bit smoother than when I had originally tried it. I will talk about that a little bit later, but it's kind of on the mushy end if you're someone who prefers to find that wall first and then follow through with your shot. It's a light pull, it's not hard to use. You can see here that it does come in with a pretty light pull weight, and once you go in for that full motion, it is solid, but if you're a trigger snob, maybe consider changing out. And on the topic of length of pull, we absolutely have to discuss the bolt here. That is probably the key feature of this, right? So no way we're glazing over it. I mentioned before that this is about 23 inches and the majority of it is the bolt. So yeah, it's easy to say that the bolt though on this is more than ridiculous. I always like to see novel concepts in the industry. It's nice when you see companies trying to really push the boundaries of what we expect arms to look like. So I will give this some love in unique concept here that the bolt is actually multi-stage. So you can see here that I can pull it back in 10 separate increments, indicating 10 different power levels for your shot. Although I will say, I don't think that 1 through 8 are really useful. They will provide a very short distance of throw. I don't know what circumstances someone would be interested in that setting. Although I guess if you are in an apartment or something like that and you're worried about over penetration, then those might be an option for you. But for my uses, for my intended purpose with this, 10 or bust. Aside from having weak implementation within the other settings, I do have a problem with this design in the fact that the bolt being so absurd does prevent a proper cheek weld. You're obviously not putting your face on this part because once you engage that trigger, the bolt will go home and it will hurt. So when you use this, you're probably not going to shoulder, but instead use more like a RPG type thing. I don't think this rifle knows quite what it wanted to be, which, to be fair, they called it the K9 cannon. We're gonna treat it like a cannon, but that is something to consider, that the spring is exposed to the user and that if there were a malfunction to occur regarding that spring, the shooter's face is going to be very close to it irregardless. That can wind up causing some serious damage. I would be curious to see the manufacturers of this rifle to maybe consider an alternate bolt design. I do like the concept of it. I do think there's room for improvement. One area of improvement being in regard to how far back the bolt goes, making it difficult for the user. I think maybe if the manufacturers considered a side charger in which you can utilize the 23 inches, 20 inches of the bolt area, start straight from the front, pull back and utilize this space so that the user can still maintain this without having to add additional length and go towards their face. Another little side note that I just noticed here, I keep using the ammo holder here as a foregrip. I guess that's an option if you're not someone who needs to put ammo in that spot. There's plenty of other ways to hold munitions. So yeah, that actually kind of works. That's not a bad idea. But I do think there's room for tweakability within this design, and a side charging bolt would probably be a great implementation if this manufacturer were to consider a Model 2. And to continue on with the concept of bolt improvements, like I mentioned, the bolts at other settings doesn't exactly provide a lot of oomph for the round. I would imagine that lethality performance and long-term performance are less than desirable, but unfortunately, even at the 10 setting, I find this to be leaving a little bit more desired. I tried actually chronoing this, and the one that I had goes to 100, but it didn't even pick up. So at full charge, the velocity isn't even reaching what one would expect to have optimal terminal performance. Now, for those of you who are familiar with this specific caliber, then you know that it was originally designed to be used with a manual system. Typically, you would see users either engage in a manual throw or use a racket type system to launch the munitions. When you see something like this, you see this blunderbuss, you would expect that to exceed the capabilities of a manual operating system. But unfortunately, this actually underperforms what the average person could do without it. I am pathetic at throwing. I am pathetic at sports. So maybe I'm not the best comparison, but I will say even myself, I'm capable of launching the projectile farther distances than what this does perform with on average. I say on average, it does have a pretty wide spread of performance capabilities. It's not consistent in the slightest, but even then, myself with my tiny little arms here can launch the projectile further, which really doesn't look great for the manufacturer. Now, for someone who has adequate training and has been fully taught the capabilities of using the manual system, you can 100% outperform the blunderbuss that I have in my hands here. The record for that actually winds up being 240 feet per second, which is extremely impressive. Not something that I'm ever going to be hitting, but far exceeding this. Even if you look at the average user, they're going to be capable of launching that projectile farther than this. To not give this too much crap here, I will say that does have the added benefit of not having to handle the munitions as much. Obviously, some people, if you're around ammo often, then you have concerns over long-term lead exposure and all the chemicals and things like that. In this instance, maybe you don't want to handle the ammunition if it is heavily waterlogged, especially freshly heavily waterlogged. I do not enjoy spit all over my hands. So this system does provide the ability to kind of bend down and pick up munitions without having to directly touch it, which is great, especially if you're older or, you know, in pain, you hit your 30s and all your joints hurt. You don't have to bend over to pick things up. That's always a nice feature. And one great thing about this caliber type is that it is intended to be reusable. Although I will say, sometimes the target likes to pick the munition up afterward and not necessarily give it back. I don't know if that was an intended design or not. I don't know if maybe I'm just using it wrong, but no take, only throw is a very real struggle with this munition. After some usage on this system, it was very quickly evident to me and my friends here that it seemed to have a major problem with spring tensioning, which is an easy fix in most cases. Takedown was obviously an important conversation. If we're going to be changing out internal components, how easy is this to take down and put back together? I will say, you can see here that there are multiple screw locations in which you are required to undo in order to take this apart. And while it's not necessarily difficult to do, there's a lot of them and it became very cumbersome. Please excuse the hammer multi-tool that I'm using here. I could not find the screwdriver that I wanted, which made the situation a lot more difficult for me. Probably didn't help, but once we got it taken down, we opted for twisting the spring in order to create more tension on it. So you can see here that there's a twist on this side now. This is what it originally had looked like. This did create a little extra tension. And like I said before, with the trigger being less mushy, I do think it did provide a bit of performance improvement. Considered twisting it more, but honestly, I got lazy with taking it apart a second time. And at that point as well, twisting probably isn't the best option for long-term performance. I do think this spring will degrade faster now as a result of my chosen improvement method, but there are a lot of options online for springs that might work better with this system. I will say, unfortunately, there is nothing designated for this weapon type. So if you are going to purchase an alternate spring online, you're gonna have to do a bit of research in regards to what length you want, what tensioning, thickness, things like that. And it might be a bit of trial and error to get one that is just right for your needs. That's why I opted just for twisting it. I figured it was easier at that point and I didn't necessarily care as much, But look around, let me know if any of you guys change it out. Let me know if it works better. Let me know what you purchased, and maybe I'll consider doing the same. Whether the manufacturer intended it or not, it is clearly set up in a way that does allow the user to tweak it to their own specific needs. One thing I did notice when I took this apart, the internal mechanism was a bit different than I had originally anticipated. You can see here that it's more reminiscent of like a grease gun or something like that. I was expecting a much more simplified, just spring tension system, which isn't a bad thing. It just does mean that there's more potential for wear and tear on the components, given that the current setup is here. There's 2 springs within this design, so not only is this major spring a potential point of failure, but the additional spring on the inside that's allowing tensioning with the trigger. But overall, while I might have some complaints about this, and I do think there's a lot of room for improvement, there is no denying the fact that, well, the individual at the other end of the trigger is very much in love with it and thinks it was a fantastic purchase. So at the end of the day, that's really what matters, is that it is effective for the end user. Now, it is certainly entertaining if you're looking for a fun range toy, just something simple so that you maybe don't have to strain your shoulders if you're hurt in some capacity. Again, picking up, putting down. But in terms of a tactical sense and in terms of a capability performance, I do think this dropped the ball. It's not the fastest to reload. It's not the safest maybe to shoot if malfunctions were to occur and cause injury to the shooter. But at the end of the day, for the price range of this, I'm not too mad. I will probably wind up playing around more with aftermarket capabilities like adjusting the spring. I might throw a rail up here, we'll see. This could be a fun option for night shoots as well. If I do put a night vision setup on here, they do make glowing ammunition for this caliber type, which is pretty cool. So maybe we'll see that in the future. But that's all I had for you guys regarding this one. I hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe consider this if you do have another furry co-host like myself, and I hope to see you guys next time.
Cat. Cat, 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 cat. Cat, 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 cat. Oh no! Oh no! Ah, ah.